Ethan Miller sat in the back row of the lecture hall, his human frame noticeably different from the array of alien students surrounding him. The Galactic Academy had only recently begun accepting humans into their programs, and even after 3 months he still felt the curious stares whenever he entered a room. Most of his classmates kept a respectful distance, though whether that was politeness or caution he could never quite tell. Professor Thalarin stood at the front, her crystalline body catching the light and scattering it across the walls in dancing patterns. She was explaining the new Cultural Exchange Initiative, a program designed to help students from different worlds understand each other better. Each participant would have the chance to present something meaningful from their home culture. Ethan's hand went up almost automatically. He had been thinking about this for weeks. Back on Earth he missed Duke terribly. His German Shepherd had been his constant companion for 5 years, and the separation had been harder than he expected. This seemed like the perfect opportunity to share something important about human culture while also getting to see his best friend again. Yes, student Ethan? Professor Thalarin's voice had a musical quality, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. I'd like to participate in the exchange program, Ethan said. I want to show everyone what human companionship looks like. I'll bring my pet to demonstrate. The room went quiet. Several students turned to look at him with their various sensory organs. The professor's internal glow flickered, which Ethan had learned meant she was processing something unexpected. Your pet? She asked carefully. Please explain what this term means in human culture. My dog, Ethan replied with a smile. His name is Duke. He's a German Shepherd. Dogs are animals that live with humans as companions. They're part of our families. He noticed the Melvari student sitting a few rows ahead drop her datapad. It clattered against the floor with a sharp crack. Around the room, students began whispering to each other in their native languages. The atmosphere had shifted from curious to something else entirely. Professor Thalarin's glow dimmed significantly. Student Ethan, when you say dog, do you mean a canine species? A carnivorous mammal? Well, yes, Ethan said, confused by the sudden tension. But Duke's not dangerous or anything. He's really friendly. He loves meeting new people. The whispers grew louder. A Kthari student in the front row, whose scales normally showed a calm blue color, had shifted to a deep orange that Ethan recognized as a threat display. The Zentari delegation was huddled together, their antennae vibrating rapidly. Perhaps, the professor suggested delicately, you could bring a smaller creature? Something less physically capable? Ethan frowned. Duke's not that big. I mean, he's about 70 pounds, but he's incredibly gentle. I used to volunteer at a children's hospital with him back home. The kids loved him. This statement seemed to make things worse rather than better. The idea that humans allowed these creatures near their young appeared to be beyond comprehension. The class ended early with Professor Thalarin dismissing everyone in a hurry. She said something about needing to consult with the administration about safety protocols. Ethan left the hall completely baffled by the reaction. What he didn't see was what happened next. Within an hour, every alien student who had been in that lecture hall was deep in research about Earth canines. The Galactic Academy's database servers experienced unusual strain as dozens of students simultaneously searched for information about dogs. The Melvari student, Chilan, sat in her quarters staring at her screen with growing horror. Dogs, she learned, were descended from wolves. Wolves were apex predators that hunted in coordinated packs, capable of taking down prey many times their size. Their jaws could exert over 300 pounds of pressure per square inch. They had 42 teeth designed specifically for tearing meat. Their sense of smell was tens of thousands of times more powerful than most species, making them exceptional trackers. And humans kept them in their homes, with their children. The Kthari delegation gathered in their common area, sharing their findings. Canines had been bred by humans for thousands of years for various purposes: hunting, guarding, herding, even fighting. The fact that humans had deliberately shaped these predators to be more effective at specific tasks was deeply unsettling. They weaponized them, one Kthari said, his scales flickering between orange and red. No, another corrected, reading further. They made them into companions. Look at this, there are classifications called toy breeds that humans carry around for comfort. That doesn't make it better. That makes it worse. By morning, a formal petition had been drafted. 17 students signed it, requesting that the administration cancel Ethan's presentation on the grounds that it posed an unacceptable safety risk to the student body. The petition included a detailed breakdown of canine physical capabilities, hunting instincts, and historical records of dog attacks on Earth. The Vrithan Council convened an emergency session. 5 council members stood in a semicircle, their crystalline bodies glowing with agitated patterns as they reviewed the petition. "The bite force alone makes this inadvisable," one council member stated. "We cannot risk student safety." "But the human specifically said the creature is safe," another argued. "He called it friendly. He said it was good with children." "That's what concerns me most," a third council member interjected. "The human shows no fear whatsoever. Either he's delusional or humans have such a different threat assessment system that we cannot trust their judgment on safety matters." "We've already approved the Cultural Exchange Initiative," the eldest council member said. "Canceling one student's presentation, especially a human student, could create diplomatic issues. Earth is a new member of the galactic community. We must be careful." After hours of debate, they reached a compromise. The presentation would go forward, but with extensive safety measures. Additional medical personnel would be on standby. Containment fields would be installed in the lecture hall. And Professor Thalarin would personally meet with Ethan to review safety protocols. When the professor called him to her office, Ethan listened patiently as she outlined the requirements. Duke would need to remain on a restraint at all times. Ethan would need to maintain constant control. Any sign of aggression would result in immediate termination of the presentation. Of course, Ethan agreed to everything, still not understanding why everyone was so worried. "Duke's really well trained. I've had him since he was 8 weeks old. He knows all the basic commands and a bunch of tricks too." The phrase, "I've had him since he was 8 weeks old," sent another chill through the professor. The human had raised this predator from infancy. The bond between them was probably incredibly strong, which could make the animal even more dangerous if it perceived any threat to its human. Ethan left the office shaking his head. He sent a message back to Earth, arranging for Duke to be transported to the station. In his quarters that night, he looked at pictures of his dog on his tablet, excited to see him again. Duke, for his part, had no idea he was about to become the most feared creature at the Galactic Academy. The day of Ethan's presentation arrived with an atmosphere of dread hanging over the Galactic Academy. Students filed into the lecture hall earlier than usual, but not out of enthusiasm. They wanted to secure positions as far from the presentation area as possible. The back rows filled first, then the side sections, until finally only the front seats remained empty, like a barrier zone that nobody dared cross. Professor Thalarin had installed additional safety measures overnight. Shimmering containment fields lined the edges of the presentation platform, ready to activate at the first sign of danger. 3 medical technicians stood in the corner, their emergency equipment clearly visible. The air filtration system had been upgraded to handle potential biological hazards, though nobody was quite sure what those might be. Chilan sat in the middle section, her hands gripping the edge of her desk. She had barely slept, her mind filled with images of snapping jaws and predatory eyes. Part of her wanted to leave, to watch from her quarters through the remote feed. But another part, the curious part that had driven her to join the academy in the first place, needed to see this for herself. The Kthari students had clustered together in the far corner, their scales shifting through nervous color patterns. The Zentari delegation had positioned themselves near the exit. Even the usually confident Bracken students, whose own species was known for physical strength, seemed uneasy. The door at the side of the hall opened. Ethan walked in, and beside him, connected by a simple woven lead, walked Duke. The reaction was immediate and primal. Students in the nearest rows scrambled backwards so fast that chairs toppled over. Several Melvari students climbed onto their desks, seeking higher ground. A Zentari student made a sound like steam escaping from a pressurized container. The Kthari scales flashed bright red in unison. Duke's ears perked up at all the sudden movement. His tail began to wag, a rhythmic swishing that most of the aliens didn't understand. To them, it looked like a muscular appendage swinging back and forth, possibly preparing for an attack. "Hey everyone," Ethan said cheerfully, completely oblivious to the terror he had brought into the room. "This is Duke. Say hi, buddy." Duke sat down, his tongue hanging out as he panted slightly. The movement of his mouth revealed rows of white teeth, and several students gasped audibly. Professor Thalarin stood behind her protective podium, her glow so dim she was almost transparent. "Student Ethan, please proceed with your presentation." Ethan smiled and walked to the center of the platform, Duke keeping pace beside him perfectly. "So, I wanted to show you all what companionship means in human culture. Duke here has been my best friend for 5 years. He lives in my home, sleeps in my bedroom, and goes almost everywhere with me." A brave Zentari student, pressed against the far wall, raised a trembling appendage. Why would you allow a predator into your sleeping space? Aren't you vulnerable when you sleep? Ethan looked genuinely surprised by the question. Duke would never hurt me. He's loyal. That means he's devoted to protecting me, not harming me. But how can you trust it? The Zentari pressed. Watch this, Ethan said. He turned to Duke and spoke a single word. Sit. Duke, who was already sitting, remained perfectly still. Down, Ethan commanded. Duke immediately lowered himself to the floor, his belly touching the ground, his head resting on his paws. The movement was smooth and instant, showing complete obedience to the human's voice. The aliens watched in stunned silence. A predator, a creature built for hunting and killing, had responded to simple verbal commands with immediate compliance. The implications were staggering. How is this possible? Cheelon heard herself ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan heard her anyway. Training and trust. Duke knows I'm his pack leader. He wants to please me. Watch this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brown object. Treat, he said, holding it up. Duke's attention locked onto it with laser focus, but the dog didn't move. Stay, Ethan commanded. He placed the treat on the floor directly in front of Duke's nose, close enough that the dog could simply lean forward and take it. But Duke remained frozen, his eyes fixed on the treat, his body trembling slightly with the effort of restraint. The room held its collective breath. Here was a predator, a hunter with food within immediate reach, and it waited. It waited because a human had told it to wait. Ethan let several seconds pass, each one feeling like an eternity to the watching students. Then he said, "Okay." Duke snatched the treat so fast that several students flinched. He crunched it between his powerful jaws and swallowed, then looked up at Ethan with what could only be described as adoration. Good boy, Ethan praised, scratching behind Duke's ears. The dog's tail wagged harder, thumping against the floor. Ethan continued his demonstration. He showed how Duke could shake hands, placing his paw in Ethan's extended hand on command. He showed how Duke would lie on his side and play dead. He even showed how Duke could walk on his hind legs for a few steps, though this particular trick made the aliens even more nervous as it displayed the dog's full height. Humans have been working with dogs for over 30,000 years, Ethan explained. We didn't just tame them. We became partners. They helped us hunt, they guarded our homes, they kept us warm on cold nights. In return, we gave them food, shelter, and love. Love? A Kthari student repeated the word as if it were foreign. You love this predator? Of course, Ethan said simply. Duke loves me too. He'd defend me with his life if necessary. But more than that, he's happy when I'm happy. He's sad when I'm sad. We have an emotional bond. As if to demonstrate this point, Duke suddenly stood up and pressed against Ethan's leg, leaning his weight into the human. Ethan absently reached down and stroked the dog's head, the gesture so natural and automatic that it was clear this was something they did constantly. Then Duke yawned. It was a simple, innocent action. The dog was relaxed, perhaps a bit bored with standing still for so long. He opened his mouth wide, revealing every single one of his 42 teeth. His pink tongue curled and a small sound escaped his throat. The effect on the audience was electric. Students who had started to relax tensed up again. The Melvari on the desks crouched lower. One Zentari student actually activated their personal shield device, a shimmering bubble appearing around them. Duke closed his mouth and looked around with mild curiosity, wondering why everyone seemed so agitated. His tail continued its steady wagging. Ethan noticed the reaction this time. He looked at Duke, then at the terrified students, then back at Duke. Slowly, understanding began to dawn on his face. They weren't just cautious about Duke. They were genuinely frightened. He was just yawning, Ethan said softly. He's relaxed. That's a good thing. But the damage was done. The image of those teeth, those powerful jaws, was now burned into every alien mind in the room. Professor Thalaren's glow had reduced to almost nothing. Ethan's presentation had ended without incident, much to everyone's relief and surprise. Duke had left the lecture hall the same way he had entered, calm and friendly, completely unaware of the psychological impact he had made on the alien student body. But something unexpected happened in the days that followed. Other human students, inspired by Ethan's courage and perhaps not fully understanding why everyone had been so frightened, decided they wanted to share their pets too. Lucy Chin was the first to approach Professor Thalaren with a request. She was a biology student, small and cheerful, with a bright smile that had slowly been winning over some of her more nervous classmates. She wanted to bring her cat to the next cultural exchange session. The professor's glow flickered with what was becoming a familiar pattern of anxiety. Another Earth predator? Oh, Luna's much smaller than Duke, Lucy assured her. She only weighs about 10 pounds. She's very sweet. The word sweet meant nothing to Professor Thalarin, but the promise of a smaller creature seemed manageable. Permission was granted, though with the same safety protocols that had been used for Duke. When Lucy arrived the following week, she carried a small container with breathing holes. The alien students, still recovering from the dog incident, watched with cautious curiosity as she opened it. A sleek gray cat emerged, her green eyes scanning the room with an expression of supreme indifference. Luna stretched, extending her front legs and arching her back. As she did, her claws emerged from her paws, sharp and curved like tiny daggers. Then just as quickly they retracted back into her paws, disappearing completely. A Melvari student made a choking sound. The blades? They hide inside its body? They're retractable, Lucy explained, picking Luna up and cradling her. The cat immediately began producing a low rumbling sound from her chest. She can extend them when she needs to climb or defend herself, then pull them back when she's just walking around. That's a built-in weapon system, a Kthari student said, his scales shifting to orange. A concealed weapon system. Lucy laughed, thinking it was a joke. I guess you could say that. But Luna mostly uses her claws for her scratching post. Watch this. She set Luna down on the presentation table. The cat sat primly, wrapping her tail around her feet, and began to groom herself. Her pink tongue, rough like sandpaper, licked across her fur in methodical strokes. Humans keep felines? Chilan asked, her voice filled with disbelief. She had done research after Ethan's presentation. Cats, she had learned, were never fully domesticated like dogs. They had essentially domesticated themselves, choosing to live near human settlements to hunt rodents. They were solitary hunters, perfectly designed killing machines on a small scale. Cats have lived with humans for thousands of years, Lucy said. Though, to be honest, sometimes it feels like we live with them rather than the other way around. Luna pretty much does whatever she wants. This statement horrified the aliens even more. The predator was independent? It made its own choices? Luna, bored with grooming, suddenly leaped from the table to a nearby chair, then to a desk, moving with fluid grace that showcased her predatory agility. Students scattered from her path. She landed silently, patted across the desk, and began investigating a datapad with her paw. Luna, no, Lucy said, but the cat ignored her completely, continuing to bat at the datapad until it fell to the floor. The fact that the human's command had been ignored was noted by every alien in the room. At least the canine had been obedient. This creature acknowledged no authority. The next week brought Tom Rodriguez and his parrot, Apollo. The bird sat on Tom's shoulder as he entered, its feathers a brilliant mix of blue, yellow, and green. The alien stared at the creature, noting its sharp, curved beak and intelligent eyes. Good morning, class, Tom said cheerfully. Good morning, class, Apollo repeated in a perfect imitation of Tom's voice. The room went dead silent. Several students instinctively checked their translation devices, wondering if they had malfunctioned. Did that creature just speak? A Zentari student asked. Apollo can mimic sounds, Tom explained. He's learned dozens of phrases. He copies things he hears. Professor Thalarin is confused, Apollo said, and the voice was identical to the professor's musical tone. Professor Thalarin's glow flared bright with shock. She hadn't said anything. The bird had simply copied her voice from a previous class. How is this possible? Chilan asked, leaning forward despite her nervousness. Parrots are incredibly intelligent, Tom said. Apollo can solve puzzles, use tools, and he understands some concepts like numbers and colors. And that beak? It can crack nuts that I'd need a hammer to open. Apollo demonstrated by taking a nut from Tom's hand and crushing it with ease, the sharp cracking sound making several students jump. Over the next few sessions, more humans shared their animals. Hannah brought photographs of her horse, unable to bring the actual animal due to its size. The aliens studied the images with growing concern, calculating the weight of the creature, the power in its legs, the crushing force of its hooves. And you climb onto its back? A Kthari student asked in disbelief. Horses have carried humans for thousands of years, Hannah explained. They're strong enough to bear our weight and fast enough to outrun most predators. We trust them and they trust us. But the real shock came when a human student named Chris casually mentioned during a conversation that he kept a snake as a pet. Then another human, Rachel, talked about her tarantula collection. The word spread through the alien student body like a virus. Snakes, spiders, creatures that most species would exterminate on sight, humans kept in their homes intentionally. That evening, the Galactic Academy Committee convened another emergency session. They had compiled reports on human pet ownership, and the findings were disturbing. Humans kept reptiles with venomous bites. They kept arachnids with paralytic toxins. They kept fish that could deliver electric shocks. They kept birds of prey with talons that could pierce flesh. I propose we classify human pet culture as a form of collective insanity, one committee member suggested. No, the eldest member said slowly, reviewing the data. Look at the patterns. The humans don't just keep these creatures. They form genuine emotional attachments to them. They grieve when the animals die. They celebrate the animals' birthdays. They consider them family members. That's compassionate insanity, another member said. The phrase stuck. The committee's official report, distributed throughout the galactic community, labeled human pet ownership as compassionate insanity, a peculiar cultural trait where humans form deep emotional bonds with creatures that could potentially harm them. But buried in the report was another observation, one that would prove more significant than anyone realized at the time. The human's ability to empathize with and gain the trust of predatory species suggested a profound capacity for cross-species understanding. If humans could befriend creatures so different from themselves, what else might they be capable of? 3 weeks had passed since Ethan's original presentation, and the campus had settled into an uneasy acceptance of human pet culture. The alien students still kept their distance when any human mentioned their animals, but the initial terror had faded into cautious curiosity. Most aliens were content to observe from afar, to read about these strange bonds in their research materials, and to shake their heads at the peculiar nature of Deathworlders. Chilan was not like most aliens. The Melvari student had spent countless hours reviewing the footage from Ethan's presentation, watching the way Duke responded to his human's voice, the way his eyes tracked Ethan's movements, the obvious comfort in their physical closeness. She had studied Lucy's cat and how it chose to stay near its human despite having the freedom to leave. She had listened to Tom's parrot call his name with what seemed like affection rather than mere mimicry. There was something there, something her species had lost or perhaps never had. The Melvari were a logical people, efficient and practical. They formed partnerships based on mutual benefit, alliances based on shared goals. But watching Ethan scratch behind Duke's ears for no reason other than it made the dog happy, that was something entirely different. She found Ethan in the outdoor commons area, a rare patch of engineered greenery on the station. Duke was with him, off his lead this time, sniffing around the artificial grass with obvious enjoyment. Ethan sat on a bench, reading from his datapad, occasionally glancing up to check on his companion. Chilan approached slowly, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. Duke's head came up immediately, his ears swiveling toward her. For a moment their eyes met and she froze. Those dark eyes held intelligence, awareness. The dog tilted his head slightly as if considering her. "Hi Chilan," Ethan said, looking up with a smile. "Duke, friend." The single word changed everything. Duke's tail began to wag and he took a few steps toward her, then stopped, waiting. It was the same restraint she had seen in the lecture hall, the same response to human command. "I wanted to ask you something," Chilan said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Would it be possible for me to touch Duke? I need to understand." Ethan's smile widened. "Of course. Come sit down. Duke's great with new people." She moved to the bench, sitting carefully, leaving space between herself and Ethan. Duke approached, his movements calm and deliberate. He stopped right in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Hold out your hand," Ethan instructed gently. "Let him smell you first. That's how dogs get to know people." Chilan extended her hand, trying to keep it from trembling. Duke's nose touched her palm, wet and cold. He sniffed carefully, his whiskers tickling her skin. Then, without warning, his tongue licked across her fingers in one quick swipe. She gasped but didn't pull away. The gesture had felt friendly, not threatening. "He likes you," Ethan said. "You can pet his head now. Just use slow, gentle strokes." Chilan moved her hand to the top of Duke's head. His fur was softer than she expected, warm and thick. She stroked carefully and Duke's eyes half closed with contentment. Then something remarkable happened. The dog leaned into her touch, pressing his head more firmly against her hand, clearly wanting more. "He's asking you to continue," Ethan explained. "See how he's leaning in? That means it feels good to him." Chilan continued petting, her movements becoming more confident. Duke's tail wagged in a steady rhythm, and that rumbling sound she had heard from Lucy's cat emerged from his chest. A happy sound. He was happy because she was touching him. "I don't understand," she said softly. "He doesn't know me." Why does he trust me? Because I do, Ethan replied simply. Duke knows you're my friend, so you're his friend too. Dogs are social animals. They want to connect with others. For the first time, Qilan truly understood what she had been missing. This wasn't about logic or mutual benefit. This was pure emotion, connection for its own sake. The warmth spreading through her chest had no practical purpose, but it felt significant in a way she couldn't articulate. Word spread quickly through the student body. Qilan, known for her cautious nature, had touched the human's dog and survived. More than survived, she had smiled while doing it. Other students began to approach Ethan in the commons, hesitant but curious. A Kthari student named Vel was next. His scales shifted through uncertain colors as Ethan guided his hand to Duke's back. When Vel began making the low humming sound that was his species equivalent of a purr, Duke's ears perked up with interest. The dog moved closer to Vel, and the humming seemed to calm him even further. Your happiness sound affects him, Ethan observed. He likes it. Vel kept humming, fascinated by the dog's response. When he stopped, Duke looked up at him expectantly, and Vel couldn't help but start again. The connection was forming, simple and genuine. More students came. A Zentari student discovered that Duke would chase a ball if she threw it, returning it to her feet again and again, playing just for the joy of it. A Bracken student, massive and intimidating to most species, found that Duke showed no fear of him at all, accepting his large hands with the same trust he gave everyone else. Lucy began bringing Luna to the commons as well. The cat was less predictable than Duke, sometimes aloof and sometimes affectionate on her own mysterious schedule. But when she did choose to curl up in a student's lap, purring contentedly, the effect was profound. Students who had never experienced unconditional acceptance found themselves valued by a creature that owed them nothing. Professor Thalarin observed these interactions from a distance, taking careful notes. She had expected the Cultural Exchange Initiative to provide educational value, but this was something far more significant. The human animals were teaching the alien students something their advanced civilizations had somehow overlooked or abandoned. She watched a group of students sitting in a circle, passing Luna between them, each one marveling at the softness of her fur and the vibration of her purr. She saw Duke lying in the center of another group, belly up in a position of complete vulnerability and trust, while students took turns gently rubbing his stomach. The administration had been wrong to fear these creatures. Yes, they were predators. Yes, they had the physical capacity for violence. But the humans had taught them something else entirely. They had taught them love. That evening, Professor Thalarin submitted a new report to the Galactic Academy Committee. The human pets were not a safety concern. They were, unexpectedly, becoming the most effective teachers on campus. They were teaching empathy, teaching emotional connection, teaching that trust could exist without calculation. The committee read her report with growing astonishment. One member finally spoke what they were all thinking. If humans can create these bonds with predators, imagine what they might accomplish with us. The success of the Cultural Exchange Initiative had exceeded every expectation. What began as a single presentation by Ethan and Duke had grown into something the Galactic Academy had never anticipated. By the start of the new semester, Professor Thalarin stood before the Administration Council with a formal proposal that would have seemed absurd just months earlier. I am requesting approval to create a permanent course on human-animal relationships, she said, her crystalline form glowing with conviction. The educational value has proven significant. Our students are learning concepts that our traditional curricula have failed to teach. The council members exchanged uncertain glances. A full course, one asked. About pets. About bonds, Professor Thalarin corrected. About empathy, trust, and emotional intelligence. The humans have demonstrated skills that explain much about their rapid integration into the galactic community. We need to understand how they developed these abilities. The proposal was approved with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Within weeks, the new course had a waiting list 3 times longer than available seats. Students from every species wanted to understand the mysterious connection between humans and their animals. Ethan became a guest lecturer, bringing Duke to every class. But now he brought something more: videos and documentation from Earth showing the full spectrum of human-animal relationships. The alien students watched in amazement as he explained service dogs that helped blind humans navigate their world, acting as their eyes with perfect devotion. This dog, Ethan said, showing footage of a golden retriever guiding its human through a crowded street, has been trained for 2 years to keep this person safe. It will stop at curbs, avoid obstacles, and even disobey commands if following them would put its human in danger. A Zentari student raised an appendage. The animal can override commands? Make its own judgments. When necessary, Ethan confirmed. We call it intelligent disobedience. The dog understands the rules but also understands when breaking them is right. The concept was staggering. Humans had created partnerships with animals where the animal was trusted to make critical decisions. This wasn't just training. This was genuine collaboration between species. Lucy presented information about therapy animals, showing videos of cats and dogs visiting hospitals, nursing homes, and schools. The alien students watched silently as elderly humans smiled and laughed while petting these animals, as stressed children calmed down when holding a rabbit, as soldiers recovering from trauma found peace in the presence of a gentle horse. The animals provide emotional support, Lucy explained. Their presence alone can lower blood pressure, reduce anxiety, and help with depression. They give comfort when words can't. Chilan, who now spent hours each week with Duke, understood this completely. She had started visiting Ethan and Duke whenever she felt overwhelmed by her studies. Just sitting with the dog, stroking his fur and feeling his solid warmth beside her, helped more than any meditation technique her species had developed. But the most profound change came not from the humans, but from the alien students themselves. It started with Chilan. During a break between semesters, she returned to her homeworld and visited the nature preserves where her species kept various native creatures. There was a small mammal-like animal called a vesh, common in Melvari forests but generally ignored by the population. They were harmless, curious creatures that often approached Melvari settlements looking for food scraps. Chilan approached one carefully, remembering how Ethan had taught her to move slowly and let the animal come to her. She held out her hand. The vesh sniffed cautiously, then pressed its small head against her palm. The feeling was familiar now. Connection. Trust. She had brought the vesh back to the academy with special permission, carrying it in a comfortable enclosure. When she showed it to her classmates, explaining that she wanted to try forming the kind of bond humans had with their animals, others began to consider similar possibilities. Vel, the Kthari student, discovered that his homeworld had small reptilian creatures that were typically exterminated as pests. He wondered what would happen if, instead of killing them, someone tried to understand them. He brought one to the academy, a creature no bigger than his hand, with scales that shifted colors based on mood. Within weeks, the little reptile recognized Vel's scent and would climb onto his shoulder voluntarily. A Zentari student named Kira made perhaps the most surprising choice. Her species had long ago removed most animals from their world in pursuit of perfect efficiency. But in the agricultural zones, small flying creatures still existed, considered nuisances by most. Kira captured one, a delicate being with translucent wings, and began observing it carefully. She learned its feeding patterns, its sleep cycles, its reactions to different sounds and lights. She started speaking to it softly, the way she had seen humans speak to their pets. And slowly, impossibly, the creature began responding to her voice, moving toward her when she called, landing on her extended finger without fear. The trend spread beyond the academy. News of these developments reached other institutions, other worlds. Species across the galaxy began reconsidering their relationships with the animals on their own planets. The Galactic Biological Preservation Society reported a dramatic decrease in extinction rates as species that were once considered worthless pests were suddenly being studied as potential companions. Professor Thalarin compiled all the data, all the observations, all the transformations she had witnessed. Her final report to the Galactic Academy was titled, The Human Advantage, Cross-Species Bonding and Its Implications for Galactic Diplomacy. The report's conclusions were revolutionary. Humans, it argued, had spent tens of thousands of years learning to understand non-human minds. They had practiced empathy across species barriers, learned to read the emotions and intentions of creatures completely unlike themselves, and developed the patience to build trust with beings that couldn't even speak their language. This was why humans excelled at diplomacy despite being newcomers to the galactic stage. They had been preparing for it their entire evolutionary history. Every time a human befriended a dog, gentled a horse, or earned a cat's affection, they were practicing the skills needed to bridge the gap between different forms of intelligence. The report was distributed throughout the galactic community, read by diplomats, politicians, and educators on hundreds of worlds. The human ability to form bonds with predators, to see value in creatures others dismissed, to invest emotional energy without guarantee of return, these weren't quirks of a strange species. They were advantages that had made humans unexpectedly valuable to galactic society. Back at the academy, the transformation was complete. The commons area was now filled with students and their companions, animals from dozens of worlds forming bonds with species they would never have met otherwise. Duke still held a place of honor as the first, the one who had started it all, but he now had countless friends. Ethan sat on his usual bench, watching a Kthari student teach his small reptile to respond to hand signals while a Zentari student's flying creature performed aerial loops to the delight of onlookers. Chilan sat beside him, her vesh curled contentedly in her lap, Duke's head resting on her feet. "You changed everything," she said quietly. Ethan shook his head, scratching Duke behind the ears. "We just showed you what was possible. You all did the changing yourselves." Professor Thalarin approached, her glow warm and steady. "The Council wants to make animal companionship studies a required course for all diplomacy students," she announced. "They believe it's essential training for understanding different perspectives." Ethan smiled. "Duke would be proud. Wouldn't you, buddy?" Duke's tail thumped against the ground, and around the commons, a dozen other tails, wings and appendages responded in kind. The language of companionship, it turned out, was universal.